Good evening, everybody.
Kavod Harav, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you.
Baruch Hashem.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to continue with Gimel today. We did Bet yesterday. So it says here in the tour, "V'lo talush bechamin afilu lo yitchamemu ela bechama." So it says you should never knead the dough with hot water, but even if they were heated in the sun. "V'lo b'mayim agrufim." So let's look inside the tour here and see better what it says here fully. Yeah. Yeah, so it says here, right, that goes on from what we just read. V'lo b'mayim agrufim min ha-molyar. It never even was taken from the urn, as we said, right, hot water urn. V'hu dud gadol shenechushto ava. So it says we're talking about a big cauldron, right, which is, heats the water, and it's made out of copper in those days. V'talui al makom ha'esh umayim shebetocho poshin. So it says the water inside there is like lukewarm, right? Whatever, warm. Afilu kishe'ena esh tachtav. Even when right, there's no fire under it, it's still warm. So you should never use water like this, right? That's what the Torah is telling you. Okay, so let's see the Bet Yosef. So he says, right, besot perek kol sha'am. Over there is perek. Remember Amud Aleph. Darash Rava. Rava Darshan's there. Isha lo talush bechama velo bechamechama. Right? So he says you shouldn't use hot water, the woman, or a woman that the water which was taken from the urn, as we said. So he says Rabbeinu, the Torah explains like Rashi, but the Rif But the Rif says it's talking about something else. It's talking about water which is drawn during the daytime. Okay, interesting. So we'll go back to the Torah one more time. We have to do a little bit more there. So it says in the Torah, if she transgressed, right, and she kneaded with water, with water like this. Rav Alfas asur. According to Rav Alfas, was a rif. It's forbidden. This matzah. Afilu b'mayim shelo lanu. Even if you're talking about water which did not sit. So this Bahag also says like this: is Ve'aritz Giat, and all these rabbis say the same thing. But according to Rashi, it's only with water heated in the sun. Right, but water which did not sit overnight, b'diavad share, it's allowed b'diavad. According to Rashi. Even sometimes you can even do lechatchila, right? Preferably. When you have no other water. So it says the Rosh agreed to that. Okay. So let's, and then the Torah goes on to say, that which we forbid, right, to use water if he transgressed, right, and use warm water, hot water, whatever. Melasha Piresh Avi Ezri. So explains Avi Ezri. Dafka Avra b'mezid. We're talking about a transgressed, right, purposely. Aval shogeg, but if it was inadvertently sharet, it's allowed. Rashi asar afilu shogeg. Rashi forbids even if it's inadvertently. Upesh od. He explains furthermore there. Shasur afilu be'achila. Right, you're not allowed to eat it. Mishum chashash chimutz, because there's a concern that it got leavened. Even if he wants to eat, right? Even if he wants to eat, right, the kazayt matzah in the end, right? In other words, he's going to eat the shmura matzah afterwards. That doesn't help. Because this is even worse than the dough of the goy. So it says, right, that the Ritz and the Giat and the Bayatur, they wrote Dafka the matzah meshumeret. We're only talking about matzah which is guarded. The chen mayim shelo lanu dafka, and it's also talking about water which should not sit overnight. Le matzah meshumeret for guarded matzah. Aval lachila ashar, but to eat it it's okay. So he has a different approach to this. So it says because we hold, right, that you're allowed to eat the dough which comes from the goy. As long as you eat kazait of matzah, right, in the end, in other words, for the mitzvah. So he says, right, that my father agreed with Rashi, to forbid it even if it was done inadvertently, even for eating. Okay, good. That's the end of the tour there. So let's go to the Beit Yosef now. I think that's the end. If there's more, we'll come back. So it says here, Beit Yosef brings a source for this stuff. Right? Sham Ibay Lahu, right? They asked in the Gemara over there, Avra Belasha, if she transgressed, right, and she used water like this. Right? What's the din, right? This rabbi says it's allowed to eat that. Rav Ashi Amar Asur. Rav Ashi says it's forbidden. So it says it's known, right, that the halacha is like Rav Ashi. Right? V'katav Arosh, and says the Rosh Pirosh Rashi. Rashi explains Avra Belasha, she transgressed and she needed b'mayim chamin. We're talking about hot water or warm water, whatever. V'lav dafka b'mayim chamin. So it says that's something. It doesn't have to be really hot. Ela akol hane de darash Rabba kai. It's going on all the things that Rabba spoke about, right? The kulan mishum chamimut, because they're all because of heat. U'pirosh Rashi explains. According to Rashi, he says, I'm sorry, if she transgressed, right, and she needed water would just didn't sit all night. Mutar, it's allowed. The beha lo mibayale, because the Gemara didn't even ask about this, right? It wasn't a part of the question here. But when Ishna de Rav Yehuda mashma, but it says language of Rav Yehuda implies hachi like this. דקאמר לא תלוש אלא במים שלנו. Because it says, right, that you should only use water which sat overnight, as we said, right? ולא כמה לא תלוש במים שלא לנו. Doesn't say you shouldn't need with water that didn't rest. דהבה משמע לא תלוש בהם כלל. That would imply, that kind of language would imply that you can't use it at all. In other words, whether it's לכתחילה or בדיעבד, you shouldn't use it at all. אבל לא תלוש אלא במים שלנו, mashma, but when it says right like this, right, they should only use water which is the rest, which sat overnight. Mashma de lechatchila im yesh la mayim shelanu. So that implies that lechatchila, if right she has water that sat overnight, lo talush b'mayim shelanu. That's right. Then she shouldn't use water which didn't sit overnight. Aval im en la mayim shelanu. If she doesn't have water which sat overnight, velasha b'mayim shelanu. And then she used water which did not sit overnight. Mutar, that's allowed. Aval arif, that's according to Rashi, right? Aval arif, according to Rif, shepiresh agrufim shenishavu bo bayom. That he explains, we're talking about here water which was drawn in the daytime. Az abaya gam alayu. So then the question is also upon these things, right? The other things, like water which didn't sit overnight. V'yoter mashmak kiperush Rashi. So it says it's more right. The perush, the commentary Rashi is more right, more logical, whatever, more appropriate. The grufim belashon amoliar agruf karuf. That the word grufim, right, means that it was taken from a hot water urn. Aval le'arif, according to Rif, he says, af im grufim mashma shenigrafu minishavu min hanahar. That the word grufim is also could be that it was taken from the river. Akate hava lefrushe bo bayom. But he should have done in Dikar Isur Talui Bezman Grifa. So he says that the main issue here, right, the main prohibition, it goes, it's regarding the time of the drawing. Then he didn't explain that. But Daka Rambam, so it's according to Rambam, Perkei Gedat Rif, right? He agrees with the Rif. Sheoser be'avra be'lasha b'mayim shelo lanu. That that he forbids if he transgressed and needed water, right, with water that didn't rest overnight. Uvasiman zeh katabti. So it says in this chapter I wrote b'shem hasamag, in the name of the samag, sheken dat bala alachot galot. That also this rabbi agrees with this. So he says that's halacha, right? So he paskins the halacha like the Rif, and not like Rashi, right? So what does that mean? That if you use the water which didn't sit overnight, right, even b'diavad, it's forbidden, this Matza. Right? Not like Rashi who permits it b'diavad. Okay, interesting. Rabbeinu Yerocham katav, raiti de rabotai. So this rabbi says, right, that I saw that my rabbis, nehagin heter im asta b'shogeg. They permit if it was done inadvertently. But if it was done purposely, right, then they forbade. So he says it's proper to be, he says, right, to be concerned about their words, right, in order that we shouldn't have any mishaps, So he says, therefore, the person who's stringent about this, right, will be blessed. So what does that mean? That he should be stringent and forbid it even if it was done inadvertently. Okay, that's the end of the Bet Yosef. Let's see the Shulchan Aruch. Okay. So it says Shulchan Aruch like this: En lalush b'mayim chamim afilu lo nitchamemu ela bechama. You should never need the water with water which is hot, right? Even if it was heated in the sun. Velo b'mayim agrufim. מידוד גדול שניחשתו עבה ותלוי על מקום האש ומים שבתוכו פושעים. This is also, you shouldn't use like warm water either, right? That's also forbidden. So whether the water is hot or just warm, right? Should not use that water. אפילו כשאין האש תחתיו, even if it's not on the fire, right? The water, still, the fact that it's warm is already a problem. Okay, so that's lechatchila, right? Now we're going to get to the issue of b'diavad. So he says, right? אפילו כשאין האש תחתיו. ואם עבר ולהשבעים בהם שלו לנו אסור. So he says, if they transgressed and they use the water like this, right? Whether it's hot water or warm water, the matzah is asur to eat. It's forbidden to eat that. So who is this like? This is like the Rif, right? That we saw, right? That he forbids this even b'diavad, even after the fact. Not like Rashi. Now he brings the other opinion, right? So he says there are those that allow, if they needed, with water, right, which didn't sit overnight. But that's the Rashi. V'yesh tismoch aleim. Look what he says, right? So he says you can rely on that. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't read the whole thing, right? One more time. I skipped something here. So he says, some allow, as we said, right, to use water, if he used water, not to use, but if he used after the fact, right, water, which didn't sit overnight, and some say, right, it's allowed if he did this inadvertently. So it says in a pressing situation, you can rely on that opinion. So, right, what is he saying, right? In a pressing situation, you can rely on what? That if you used water, right, which didn't sit overnight, b'diavad, you can right, allow to eat that. As long as it was done inadvertently. But if you did it on purpose, we don't allow. Why is that? Because the rabbis fined you, right? You got fined. Because you didn't do the right thing. Okay, good. So the Rama says here in the end, so Rama goes even further, right? Even further than that. He says that even if it's not a pressing situation, right? If you used water which didn't sit overnight and you did it inadvertently, he says you can eat that, even if it's not a pressing situation. So the Rama won't make you throw it away, right? He'll let you keep it, even if the situation is not pressing. Okay, interesting, right? So that's the situation. So we see from there, by the way, the severity, right, of using, hot water, right, warm water for matzot. It's a severe thing. So the only thing we really allow, right, b'diavad, after the fact, is if you use the water again, right, to reiterate, if you use the water inadvertently, which didn't sit overnight, right, which is not really so hot or warm even, right, whatever, that we allow, b'diavad. But otherwise, right, we got a problem. So therefore, right, if you want to make matzot at home, make sure, right, that you're using nice cool water, right? No warm water, no hot water, right? Nothing like that. Even lukewarm is the problem. There you go. So let's try the next one, which is Dalid. So says the Bet Yosef over here in Dalid. Katav Samag, right? Says this rabbi. Omer Rabbi Yachiel, right? This rabbi says, Shara'a Mori Harav Yuda Bar Yitzchak. He says, we saw this, our rabbi, this rabbi, Sheitir Maim Shelo Lanu, Shenitbatlu Berov Maim Shelanu. So he says, what about, right, in the case where, the water got mixed up, right? Some of it is water that sat overnight, and some of it is not. So he says, right, if the majority is water, if it got mixed up like that, right? And so if the majority is water which sat overnight, he says this rabbi is too allowed to use that. Okay, so why is that? Benit batlu, right? Because it gets nullified, right? The majority. It gets nullified, the majority nullifies it. So therefore, even though the minority there is water which didn't sit overnight, he allowed it. Okay, interesting. So then he goes on. They all got nullified before the kneading. They were true, and they were permitted. Hey, also Haggadah says like this. Also samak. So it says, but it seems from his words. So he says, right, that which he said that it got nullified in the majority, it means it's like 2 against 1, right? In other words, the ratio is 2 to 1. And then it's allowed. That's the way he understands it, this rabbi. So less than that, right? If it's less than the ratio of 2 to 1, it seems like it didn't allow that. So that's what the Bet Yosef brings down over here. Okay, so let's see the Shulchan Aruch. Let's see what he says over here. So it says like this in Shulchan Aruch. מים שלא לנו, שנתבטלו, חד בתרי במים שלנו לשים להם. So it says Shulchan Aruch, right, like that, what we just said now. That if, right, the two bodies of water got mixed up. So what does that mean, right? You have water which sat and which water did not sit. So what we do is we say, right, if it's 2 to 1 ratio, then it gets nullified, the water that did not sit, and therefore it's allowed to use that. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says, right? But it seems like if it's less than 2 to 1, right, even though it's a majority, it doesn't work, this thing. Right? Okay, good. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll go on. Yeah. So let's go back to the Bet Yosef for a second. So it seems like this one we didn't do. Gimel. So, but let's read this one first, right? Which is hey. So it says the two, right? Where we read this, I think beforehand, that a lot of people have a custom, right? They don't put salt in matzot, right? So what does that mean? They don't put it into the dough, right, or whatever. So that's, he says, the Ashkenazim like that. They're accustomed not to put salt in there. Then tam barur le'osro. So the reasoning is just not clear. It's interesting. So it says Bet Yosef regarding this, right? Regarding this tour. So it says even though there is a little bit of a reason, What's the reason why? Because the sharpness of the salt heats up the dough. But he says it's not so clear though. What does that mean? That's what the Rosh writes. Perek kol sham, this perek. The Ran katav sham. Ran writes over there. כתב שם גבי הדי עשרינן ותיקה במאיה ומילכה פירוש מאכל של קמח שמבשלים אותו מדמינן דתניא אסור במאיה ומילכה. יש ללמוד שמותר לתת מלח לתוך לחם של פסח דווקא ותיקה הוא דאסור ומשום דאדמבה של מחמה אבל לחם לא. Right. So The Ran seems to like make a deduction, right, from the Talmud here that there's not really a problem to put salt into the dough, right, for Passover. Ve'arosh dacha raya zo. So the Rosh, he says, pushed it out. He didn't agree with this. Mishum deika lememar, because there is to say the melach memaher achimutz, because salt, what it does is it accelerates the leavening process. Keshenilosha b'mayim, when it gets kneaded into the water. Aval im nilosha b'mei perot. But it says if it was right kneaded with juice, right, fruit juice, right, hamelach lebado eno gorem achimutz. Then the salt will not really make it leaven. Interesting. Okay, so then he goes on. The Mordechai katav, says the Mordechai, sheyesh lizaher shelo liten melach ve'ochel matzah melucha keilu ochel chametz. So he says, right, he's very stringent. He says you shouldn't put salt in there, and if you do, it's like you're eating chametz. Mipnei she'amelach mosiv chom beisa. As we said, right, that he says that the salt heats up the dough. והגאות מימון כתב פרק K, says הגאות מימון, שרשב"ט היה רוצה להתיר. This rabbi wanted to, right, to permit this, למלוח מצה בפסח, to put salt on the מצה, חוץ מיום ראשון, except the first day. וחבריו אוסרים, but he says his friends are forbid this. The maliach, הרי הוא כרותח. This says why? Because when you salt something, right, it heats it up. It's like boiling. So he says, therefore, it's like as if he needed the water, right? He needed the dough with warm water. Says the kolbo, the name of the Ravad. So it says we don't put, right, in the dough, whether it's salt or spices, because these are like, they heat it up. It says that if you put enough in there that you can't eat it because it's so salty, it's forbidden to eat that. Just like water which was kneaded with with hot water. But he says if you just put a little salt in there, right? If you bake it right away, it's allowed. באכילה, you're allowed to eat that. אבל לכתחילה לא ייתן במצה של מצווה, לא ייתן כלל. So he says, right, but לכתחילה, you shouldn't put it in there at all. Okay. ואם נתן לה יצא דביין, but if he did put it, right, it says he fulfills obligation. דביין הלחם עוני, וזהו מצה עשירה, right? But he says, right, that, he didn't fulfill his obligation, he says, because this is like rich matzah, when you put salt in there. Interesting. We already pushed that out, right? We said it's not correct. Anyway, the Tzarich Iyun says you have to investigate this. Is it called right, the rich matzah because you put salt in there? So he says now, right, custom is, right, as I told you guys already, the custom is that we don't put any, right, melach lo b'shel mitzvah v'lo b'acharot ben eshanot haminhag. So he says, right, that this rabbi says that nowadays the custom is that we don't put anything in there, right, like no salt whatsoever, right, whether it's mitzvah matzah or regular matzah, whatever it may be. Okay, so this is not the Bet Yosef saying this, by the way. This is this rabbi that we just mentioned, right? Who is who? Kolbo, name of the Rabbad. Okay, interesting. So now custom is we don't put, he says. Yeah, I mean, that's well known. The truth is, today nobody puts salt and matzah in the matzah dough. Nobody does that today. So it goes on, Mit Yosef. והרשב"א כתב בתשובה, says the Rashba, ששאלת מהו ליתן מלח ביצה, right? So somebody asked him, right? Are you allowed to put salt into the dough? בפסח and Passover? באמת יש אוסרים ומביאים ראיות לדבריהם. So he says some forbid this, and they bring sources for that. אלא שהם חלושות, but he says the sources are, right, they're weak, they're not strong, right? They're flimsy. ויש מתירים, says some are allow, ואני מן המתירים, says I allow this, he says the Rashba. וראיה מפורשת נראה לי ממה שכתב ותיקרא שרה, right? And he says, it seems like from the Talmud, right? It's clear that that's the case. וכן אנו נוהגים אלא שמחמירים ואין נותנים במצה שמורה. So he says, that's the custom, he says, by us, right, that we do put salt in there, but he says when it comes to shmura matzah, we don't put. That was in his days, right? How long ago was the Rashba? More than 600 years ago, right? So that's a different generation. He was in Spain. ועכשיו פשוט המנהג שלא ניתן מלח בעיסה כלל לנכון הדבר. So the Bet Yosef, right, concludes in the end. Now the custom is we don't put salt in the matzah, right, at all, right? And he says that's correct not to do that. The correct custom. There you go, right? So the conclusion of the Bet Yosef is we don't put salt into the matzah, right? And we're talking about before the baking, because once you baked it, you can do what you want, right? Put a ton of salt in there on it, right? Nobody cares anymore. We're talking about before you baked it.
And Rabbi, is this because the salt will cook the matzah, or?
Because salt and spices, right, they create heat in the dough. This is the problem, you know?
Okay.
That's what we just said, right? So once you create heat, you know, you have a problem with maybe leavening, you know what I mean?
Kabotarav, what if they put the salt into the water first and then into the dough? It still creates this.
It's not going to help you. Yeah, and it won't help you. No.
Okay, thank
Not gonna
you.
help you. So it's all the same, right? So today, the truth is, right, that if you go to the store, right, and you look at any package of matzah, you never find that they put salt in any of that, right? There's never any salt in the matzah. Just nobody does that today. And that's why it tastes so bland, right? So how do you solve the problem, by the way? You put after, right? You can put after and, you know, make it a little bit salty if you like salty, right? Salty bread. So you can sprinkle some salt on top of it, right? And that'll help you somewhat, right? Somewhat it'll make up for the lack of salt. Okay. Because once the matzah was baked, right, it won't leaven no matter what you put on it. Right? It doesn't matter what you do. Okay, so that's the Bet Yosef. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch. So as we said, right, says Shulchan Aruch, Noagim shelo niten malech b'matzah, right? The custom is we don't put salt in matzah. V'nachon hadavar, it says it's proper not to do that, right? It's a proper custom. Afilu b'diavad yesh le'asor. So says Rama, right? Even more severe, right? Or whoever it is here in the parentheses. He says even b'diavad, right? If you use salt, right, that matzah you shouldn't eat it. He says. There you go. Even though the Shulchan Aruch didn't say that, but in the parentheses he says this. You know, some other rabbi. He brings this from the Mordechai, right? The Mordechai was very stringent about this in the Bet Yosef. We saw that. So okay, so either way, right? Today you just won't find that. You know, nobody puts salt, right? So if you're making matzot at home, make sure you don't put salt in there, right? No salt. Okay, good. So now we'll go back to the Bet Yosef. There's a piece to read there. I guess we can stop with that. Let's see what we can find there. So this is something we already did, you know, like in the Shulchan Aruch, but we missed this Bet Yosef, Gimel Gimel. So it says over here, right? Right. So this is talking about the issue, right? That we said that if he transgressed, right, and he used warm water, right, whatever. So he says that's only if he did it but purposely, right? But inadvertently, some permit that, especially with water that didn't sit overnight, as we said, right? Name Rashi. So anyway, right, it says Bet Yosef regarding that. Zelashon Arosh, right? This language of the Rosh, Zal, Sham, over there, Katav Avi Azri, right? It says Avi Azri. Tafka Avra Belasha Bemezid. That's only if he, right, did it purposely. Dumya de Avar Ve'afa Beperek Beperek Bet de Yom Tov. It resembles this case in the other Gemara in Yom Tov, in Betah. Ve'avar Ve'shiha Beperek Kira. And also this one in Shabbat, there's other Gemara that are similar to this. But he says if it was inadvertently, right, low, then we don't forbid that, right? Umilashon Rashi, So from the language of Rashi, he says, "Mashma de'afilu b'shogeg shepiresh avra v'lasha bechamin asu tekrova v'mezid hu." So he says, right, that implies in the language of Rashi that even if it was inadvertent, right? So what does that mean? That if you use hot water, even inadvertently, it's still forbidden. Why? Because that's like negligent. When you're using hot water, what I mean, that's something you should have never done. So no, right? Shame on you, right? Whatever, right? So that's why we forbid it. That's what he says. Okay, so says because it doesn't resemble the case of the the dough of the goyim. So meaning what? That's even more lenient, right, than this. Right, so because we said over there, Adam memalek mehem, that a person can eat, right, the dough of the goyim, right? So it says here there's something else. Why? Because we're fining him because he transgressed the words of the rabbis. This is the reason why we're stringent about it. Okay. V'gam mashma midbarav. So this is also implied from his words. The asur b'achila. You're not allowed to eat it either, right? That matzah mishum chimutz, because of its leavening. Af im yochal kazait matzah be'achrona. Even if he's going to eat, right, kazait of matzah afterwards, right, for the mitzvah, doesn't help. The gara b'miktzat b'sekot shel goyim. As we said, right, it's even worse than the dough of the goyim. But the Ran says differently, right? Katab Perush Rashi, he says, right, according to Rashi, Belot Dame Katab Perush Rashi, he wrote the Perush of the commentary of Rashi, Belot Dame le Betzekot Goyim. So it doesn't resemble the dough of the Goyim, which is allowed, as we said, right? In those days anyway, it was allowed. Teacha who the Kansua Rabbanan, because the rabbis here find him, right? Because he transgressed the words of the rabbis. Mashma, so it says, according to his words, it implies Shem lasha beshogeg, if he did it inadvertently, lo mitzar, it's not forbidden. Right? K'de'amar be'afal b'yom tov l'shabbat, the lo mitzar, ela sadek, we said in the other Gemarot, ela b'mezid. It's only forbidden if you did it purposely. Ela she'efshar lomar, but it says it's possible to say, ta'hida be'vesakot ha'goyim ma'ere shel lasha b'fanav b'mayim shelanu. So he says that which we're talking about, the dough of the goyim, we're talking about that he did it in front of us, right? As we said, right? There's another way to understanding that the goy did in front of the Jew, and therefore we rely on that. Kimosh katabnu, like we wrote already, like above. B'shem Rabbeinu Chananel, name Rabbeinu Chananel. Aval isa shenelosha b'mayim shelo nanu, but it says dough which was needed in water, which didn't sit overnight. Lo asinan mishum knas. So we don't forbid that, right, because of a fine. The only problem is, right, that we're concerned that it's leavened. Why is that? It's because since the water is warm, right, it makes it leaven faster. So maybe it maybe it got leavened and we can't recognize it. Ad kan the end of it. It says, Katavti shasmag. He says, I already wrote in this chapter that the samag, Katab Hashem Rabbi Eliezer Mimitz. He wrote the name of this rabbi. Kedivri Avi Ezri, like this Avi Ezri. The Davka Avra Aval Im Shagaga, that's only if he did it on purpose, right? But if he did it inadvertently, and he needed it, mutar, it's allowed. Katab Od, he writes furthermore, so he says, the Chatchila, we can write, we can use it if it's not, there's nothing else available. Mashma b'divrei Orchot Chaim. So implies from Orchot Chaim the kol hanach de'aminan avra v'lasha. Then in the case where we say, right, transgressed and he he needed it, asur, that's forbidden. Hanamile be'achila, that's only to eat. But just to get benefit from it is allowed, right? Mutar. So how do you get benefit from it? You can sell it to a goy, right? That's okay, But to eat it yourself, we don't want you to do that. So this is, they only said, right, these rabbis said, we're only talking about a case where it's a shmura matzah. Because that which we said, right, that you shouldn't use hot water from the sun, they hold that it's only talking about, right, or to use water from the urn, it's talking about shmura matzah. But regular matzah, he holds that you can use. Okay. So also water that did not sit overnight, right? Dafka lematzah meshumret. That's only talking about shmura matzah. Aval lechila sharet. But just for eating in general, it's okay. Ve'rosh avi divrehem besov perek kol shah. The Rosh brought this opinion, right? Katav alehem belo neher ali. So he says, I don't agree with them. Techol echad deika lemechash mishum chimutz. So he says, why? Because since there's concern about leavening, en lechalek ben kazait matzah leshar achilat. You really shouldn't, differentiate between this matzah and that matzah. It's all the same, whatever kind of matzah it is, right? Whether it's mitzvah or regular. Hilkach nireh keperush. So therefore, it says it seems more like perush Rashi, like Rashi. Klomar she'im lash bechameh chama. So then what? What's the din? That if he needed it with the water which was heated in the sun, or water which was taken from the urn. Even if it was inadvertent, even though you don't have the shmur matzah, asur be'achila, you can't eat it. But it says when it comes to water which didn't sit overnight, that's a different story, right? So Rashi holds that it's allowed, right? When it comes to this situation. So what does that mean? What does Rashi allow? Rashi allows you to use b'diavad, right? Once you already needed it. Right, to eat that matzah, you used water which didn't sit overnight, so that's okay according to Rashi. And that's what we said in the Shulchan Aruch, right? That if you did it inadvertently, there's room to be lenient about that, right? In case of pressing the situation. So the Rosh also agree with that. So therefore, you must say that which the Rabbeinu wrote, right? The Torah. Avi writes and Hiskim leferesh leperush Rashi that the Rosh agreed with the explanation of Rashi. Leosro afilu b'shogeg, forget even if it was shogeg, even if it was inadvertent. Even if it was to eat it, the Hanach the Darash Rabba Kai, it's talking about what Rabba darshaned, and it's not talking about water which didn't sit overnight, right? So meaning what? That when it comes to water that didn't sit overnight, we can be a little bit more lenient, right? But when it comes to warm water or hot water, there's no room to be lenient in any case, right? That's what we're trying to say. Okay. The Rabbi Magid Perkei, right? Says the Rabbi Magid, Gam ken hevi divrei Eretz Giat. He also brought this rabbi's words. Ubalai to shehem sovrim the dinim elu dafka b'matzah mishumed. That they hold that's only talking about matzah, which is shmura. Aval lo b'shar pat, but not with other, regular matzah. V'hu zal satar devarehem. And he argued with them about this, right? He says there's no difference between regular matzah and shmura matzah. When it comes to this din, it's all the same. So he he writes that that's the majority of authorities hold like that, right? The commentaries. And he says that's halacha. That's the Rabbi Yerucham. What does he say? He says, I saw my rabbis. So he says they were lenient when it comes to water which didn't sit overnight if he did it inadvertently, right? Like we saw in the Shulchan Aruch. But it says if he did it on purpose, though, that's a different story, right? They forbade that. Why? So it says the reason is because we want to find this person and teach him a lesson, right? Don't do it again. Shame on you, right? No. That's the reason why we forbid it. So he says the one who's stringent is going to be blessed, right? Regarding this. So it says Bet Yosef, right? This is halacha. We just said now. So what's halacha? The law, as we said, right? In the Shulchan Aruch. Halacha is, again, right? To reiterate, if you used water which didn't sit overnight, and you did it inadvertently, right? You made a mistake, in other words. Right? It wasn't on purpose. So then we allow you to eat that matzah, right? That's the halacha, b'diavad. So that's the story, right? Okay, very good. Thanks for coming tonight. God bless. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Shabbat shalom. We'll see you, B'ezrat Hashem, next week and continue our journey, right? To making fresh matzot at home every day. Can you imagine you make fresh matzot every day? On Passover, every day you have hot matzot. And we Sfaradim, right? We make it soft, so it's a kapita, so we don't use that hard stuff, what I mean? The rock, right? So we don't get a stomachache from that rocky matzah, right? Okay, B'ezrat Hashem. So we'll see you next week, Sunday night. Laila Tov, All the best.
Thank you so much.
Bye.